Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Adam, welcome. Thank you. Look forward to the conversation.
This is going to be fun. This is the first time in the season we're exploring the revenue perspective and how the B2B revenue engine is really overdue for reinvention and why AI agents may be the most powerful. I don't know, maybe is like no doubt about it. If we're not talking about AI agents in the context of B2B growth, what the heck are we doing? Now, Jason, CRO at Observe.AI, brings 30 years of enterprise sales experience to the table, including early days with Workday. That must have been quite an experience for you, Jason. But we'll start off with an icebreaker and then we're going to dive in. You've been in sales leadership for 20 years plus. Like in this moment in time with AI shift, what's truly different, or maybe even are you having any deja vu moments from all the revolutions that we've been a part of in the past?
I think we are at the tip of a very new and exciting time, quite frankly, and in a few different areas where AI can make a huge impact on sales. The first is helping even onboarding reps. Pareto's principle is everything. The 80/20 rule is everything. And
Hmm.
what you find a lot of sales organizations, the top 20% of the reps are driving a huge part of the revenue. Now, one of the keys to having a successful sales organization is you want that distribution across everyone. You want to be able to shrink the time for them to be productive. Well, AI allows to have a much more tailored learning environment. So you can meet people where they are. You can coach them. You can develop them. AI also has a huge impact, and where I'm seeing the biggest impact is early in the sales cycle, helping with productivity. Think about even account research and the enterprise space and the strategic space. Reps need to be and sales professionals need to be very tailored in that outreach. If they send it something generic, they are not going to get a response in any way. And it's critical that they tailor that message. Well, if they have to do research and read the 10K and do all the work versus leverage a tool like AI, they're not really optimizing their productivity at all.
It's almost like you think about the sales journey or the sales professional, what aspect of their life is not going to be touched. I'm talking about professional or arguably all of our lives everywhere, but from
Mhm.
onboarding, as you said, to preparing for all the conversations. I want to start out by talking about the pipeline versus kind of precision aspect. You said no sales teams ever complain about too much pipeline, but precision is the challenge. Where do you see the biggest friction in finding the right accounts and the signals about them? So before we dive into preparing for the calls, how do you even start out by finding the right accounts to focus on?
Well, there are a variety of tools. I've worked with a couple. Sixth Sense is an example, Clay is another. They can start to track areas like intent. So it depends on what a company is selling, but there are a large number of accounts in the enterprise space that they could be reaching out to. Well, how can they track some intent signals? For example, Sixth Sense, you might be doing keyword searches on what solutions that company has to offer, or they may be looking up your competitors. They may be hitting your website. And so these little signals allow a sales professional or a BDR to start to take a look at, hey, where might we try to engage with someone that we're starting to see these, little bubbles or little signals start to show that there's some level of interest. I'd say that the second piece of that is, well, then how is that message tailored? How can you then not just reach out to say, hey, I saw you went to our website, but how can a sales professional go with messaging unique to that industry, unique to that customer, highlighting customers that they've impacted in a similar way where you're much more likely to get great engagement?
Yeah, Jason, and I hear Sixth Sense. I've actually heard positive feedback. I've heard some mixed signals, but I mean, I am curious because you are in this season the first uh, sales professional that we're bringing on, and typically it's marketers that have talked about Sixth Sense. I am curious on who is the right owner. I don't know if there's such a concept as the right owner, but when you bring on a tool like this into an organization, should this be on the marketing side or the sales side?
I guess I see it as both. And at the end of the day, I was actually at a summit put on in San Francisco by one of our VCs about 3 weeks ago, and the CMO from a really large organization was talking about who generates or gets attributed a lot of the different pipeline goals. And the CMO had been with the company for 8 years, and what he said I thought was incredibly impactful. He said, its alignment between sales and marketing with what the pipeline goals are much more important than who gets it or who does it. It's, are they hitting those goals? Are they going into week one of a quarter with a pipeline that's going to have success? So intent and sixth sense can be powerful for marketing to look at trends and do things overall, but it can also be very impactful for a salesperson. Let's say they're starting to work with an account. Well, and the account isn't sharing with them necessarily who they're competing with. Well, Sixth Sense can start to point some signals that could give an indication of, what are they searching on? What competitors are they looking at? It gives insights that helps that sales professional in that active engagement or in that account targeting. So my answer would be both.
Hmm. With you. And let's go back to something you said before. I'd like to just double click on it. You talked about onboarding reps at different, and you've done it at Workday all the way to Observe. How do you reduce the output gap between your 80/20 you're talking about, or let's talk about those that are just coming in fresh? How do you get them to the tenure performance level as quickly as possible?
Well, two things. One is I'll say what I've seen most effective today. And then the second piece, I'll talk about maybe the vision of where AI can take us in the future. I
Hmm.
haven't seen,
Perfect.
and if the tools exist, I'd love to see them. But what I found what's most effective today is people learn from their peers, probably infinitely more valuable than they necessarily learn from management. There are some key functional pieces of the technology, of the system, of the customers that an onboarding plan and program that is incredibly important and can help people ramp up to speed. But I find the piece that is most impactful for helping sales professionals onboard is learning from their peers, hearing the win stories, hearing the loss stories, hearing from customer success as
Right
to
on.
the impact an organization has, hearing from customers themselves. When you learn and you internalize those stories, sales is a blend of art and science. And it's not just science. There is an art. Well, that art form is really fully materialized when the sales professional has understood the impact and value it can provide. And so I would say is learning from peers, learning from customers is one of the greatest ways to onboard because then they can go share those real life stories. It's not just theoretical. They're talking about the really proven impact.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
This
Hmm.
the second piece I would say is, where can AI take us? I think education and AI, whether it's sales or everything, is it can be so tailored for that individual. You think about you hire salespeople, they come from a variety of backgrounds. Maybe they've got great sales experience, but they don't have industry or product experience within selling that solution. Well, AI could develop a tailored training methodology that's unique to that individual that you could never do today. You're going to have a basic onboarding plan and it's going to hit these four or five foundational people and get people to a certain level of fluency. What AI allows is to do a ongoing dialogue, which let me meet you where you are. Okay, you need a little bit more product expertise or industry insider knowledge. Let me really meet that person where they are. I think as that gets developed, again, we can radically shrink that time to productivity.
I mean, it's quite extraordinary when you can take a fathom phone call from a salesperson on their first week, second week, doesn't matter when, and you run it against best practices and conversations of your tenured, as an example, tenured folks.
Hmm.
And then you say, here's an individualized, and let's focus on one thing for the next and the one thing for the next conversation. Literally meeting where you are with such incredible wealth that's powering it in the background, from product knowledge to experience from the vets. It just breaks your mind to think
Yeah,
about what is now possible.
yeah. The layer on top of that. Adam, which I think, and I'm working with some early stage startup companies that have some solutions that do coaching. I talked about art and science a little bit earlier. A lot of the great dialogue that takes place is between a sales manager, maybe, and a sales rep. You've got a specific situation. Hey, you've got this challenge, or you've got this competitive dynamic that you need to address, or something that's happened in the sales process. Well, those are one-on-one calls that take place between the manager and the rep. How about envisioning a day where there's an AI coach for that salesperson to talk with all the time, every day? Hey, I've just encountered this situation, and the AI coach has visibility into thousands of deals that have been worked and has seen scenarios quite similar to help provide some guidance. Again, it complements. I think we should think about AI as not replacing, but enhancing and complementing, allowing people to be infinitely more productive. But think of an AI coach not only in onboarding, but in actively working the deals.
Mm, a coach actively working the deals next to you with ability to potentially see your recordings, communications. Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Knowing the deals that you won, the deals that you've lost, looking at a database of 1,000 different deals that have been won and lost, and looking at different signals. Wow, I listened to the tone that took place on that last call. Didn't sound that positive. They were mentioning competitor X or competitor Y, and they're not returning the emails. I see you sent an email yesterday and they didn't return the email. What might we do? What might we do to think about helping create some engagement? And again, a manager can't, at any scale or level, they can't do that every single day. They can't be there to do that. AI, I do believe, in the future will be able to. Now, I haven't seen anything. If something coaching like that exists, I haven't seen it. There's tools like Boost Up and Clary that can give us little signals that can say, hey, it's been in this stage for X period of time, or certain elements of a sales process. But there is a vision that I see in the future where it is a true coach that's analyzing all aspects of the deal and in creating constant engagement and dialogue.
And let's talk about the signals, right? There are, as you said, internal signals where it's stalling. And then there are external signals about the individuals, whether it's press release mentions, buying intent signals that you mentioned, perhaps their 10Ks are being released, endless slew of signals. How do you view those external signals in terms of furthering the deal cycle and execution of the deal, maybe its current state, or maybe let's talk about a vision of what ideally do you think it should be?
Well, current state, what I would say is I'll separate the sales process into early engagement and late engagement. Early engagement, and this is where I think a lot of a ChatGPT can be incredibly helpful. It can understand what your solutions are. It can understand what a company is trying to do. I'll tell you, even a really basic question, sometimes basic things are really impactful. You strategize with a sales professional sometimes, and you'll ask a question. Well, what does this business do? How do they make money? What are their challenges? Who do they compete with? What's recent happening? What is the latest 10K? What was their last earnings statement? Well, that's incredibly time consuming. And think of all what a sales professional is doing and working their active deals and prospecting. They have only a certain number of hours of the day. A tool like ChatGPT is a very powerful tool early to the mid part of a cycle to help put these puzzle pieces together. Who are the personas and people, that we should be talking with? What are they saying? Have they attended or done any press releases recently? Have they done any speaking engagements? Are they going to be at a trade show that you might want to go meet someone? How can you tailor the message? We all get bombarded with spam email of people trying to sell something, and they are incredibly ineffective in that they're not tailored at all. And you think about, especially when you're selling enterprise and strategic level accounts, you have one chance to make that first impression. And if your first impression is a generic statement, Well, what are the odds that person's going to engage? As opposed to, hey, I noticed you are at so and so trade show speaking about X and these challenges that you have. We're helping similar companies achieve these results. I'd welcome the opportunity to talk with you. Well, think about how much more tailored. Think about the likelihood of creating engagement and the meaning of that. So there's in the early part of the process, top sales professionals are doing a great job of doing it. I'd say as you get to the middle to late stage, that's some of the vision we talked about, that AI coach, really getting it to a deeper level, listening to all the calls and gong, understanding what's happening, understanding about what emails and what's being responded to, and what inflection intent sounds like on those calls, cadence of those calls, and that individual coaching. I'd say that's where the future of this goes, and that's where we're able to be, infinitely better partners to our potential new customers, to understand what their challenges are, to engage with them, and help the sales professionals do their job. I mean, at the end of the day, the most precious commodity everyone has in sales, and we all have, is your time. There's
Absolutely.
only a finite amount of time. And how often is a sales professional maybe not optimizing that time to understand what the biggest challenges and blocker and help that customer? And they're all unique.
With you, and you said the key. Let's talk a little bit more about the personalized messages. What is the best email that we could write? What are the components of a best email? And we talked about one aspect being a signal, right? So you want to continue to monitor what's happening in their world, their
Mhm.
personal, organizational. Did they publish a LinkedIn post? Did they publish a YouTube video? Are they hiring? Are they releasing product? We can go on and on and on. There are hundreds potentially signals. Not to say they're all relevant, but signals one piece. What could be some of the other pieces that are important to think about the sales coach or AI agents or whatever would be in this vision to support the salesperson? So you've detected a signal. Now what? Is it do you stop there? Do you start to think about what content do you have that's adding value to them? Do you then look at the context of relationship? What else would be beneficial, Jason, as you see it?
You know, you think about in personal life or in business, we make a change because we're trying to solve a particular problem. And I think what can be really powerful is to be able to share something that's very personalized to that individual, that you're able to articulate a solution to a problem that they're having, maybe in a press release, or maybe at a trade show, or maybe at a speaking engagement, or maybe in a podcast. They shared a particular challenge that they're facing, or the CEO at an earnings call talked about a challenge or problem they're having to overcome, or you've helped someone else in their industry overcome a problem, and it's common across all companies that are dealing with those same problems. The more tailored it can be, A, to the individual, then B, to the company, and then the industry, the more valuable it is to create engagement and solve it. And I think that's what AI offers, that ability to go through and understand, hey, we're helping all of these customers. Here is, ingest all of the case studies and use cases and impact and value. And, pick any industry, healthcare, financial services. Well, what challenges are they facing? What issues do they have? And how can you tailor that message? And that's what the opportunity is. It's frankly, we're serving our potential customers in an infinitely more valuable way. I sometimes get bad with email, and I don't open a ton of emails, only because 80% of it is junk.
Mm-hmm.
80% of it, I use internal tools like Slack more than I use email at times, just
Right
because
on.
the noise of email is such a waste. Because again, they're not tailored, they're not solving problems. And bring it to life, I would say, is organizations learn from other organizations that are similar to them in solving problems. And if you can highlight those areas of impact, you're going to much more likely be serving them well and serving yourself well.
Yeah, I mean, what better way than to use AI toward figuring out how do you add the most value, how do you demonstrate it as quickly as possible by understanding their world and understanding what you've done for the most like organizations to them from your
Yeah.
experiences. I've also been thinking on from a curious to hear your perspective. Is there a dimension here of understanding the individual beyond the signals, but looking at their content, if they've done appearances, to start to get into the tone and voice that would resonate best with them? Is there an element of
Oh,
this person speaks very briefly, this one likes this? Do I send them a
yeah.
YouTube video? How far down that is this a rabbit hole, or is this a worthwhile
Oh no,
direction?
I think it's super worthwhile. Meet people where they are, and different people have different personalities. And again, this is where I'll say is art and science. The sales professional is an artist when something comes back as a potential message, but the tone of it isn't quite right. And, it's listened to the podcast and said, well, this person's a little bit more friendly, or they're interested in these things. Or can we cut to the chase a little bit quicker? This is taking too long. Can you turn that into two sentences as opposed to four sentences? And that is really the artistic side of making something that's relevant for that person to more likely create the engagement. AI can start to test which modes are more likely to be successful. Hey, is this person going to be more likely to respond to a LinkedIn post or an email? Start to think about what is the avenue based upon this individual. And that again, you're meeting them where they are and solving a problem in a more effective way.
And Jason, when we talk about these personalized or now hyper personalized, I don't know if there's another word above hyper person. This is like next level. There may be an invention of a new word, ludicrous mode, ludicrously
Mm.
hyper personalized emails. But when we think about that communication, at what stage in the journey, right, from a sales perspective, would you continue to monitor these signals, or is the answer all, even as they are reviewing the SOWs and they're diving in with their legal? Do you stop looking at signals, or do you want to continuously stay close to them and continuously communicate? How would you think about where do you stop this signal detection process and hyper personal, ludicrously hyper personalized emails?
Yeah. I would say is it always, because even if you're negotiating a contract, depends on how that negotiation is going. And are you finding they're still searching your competitors' websites? Well, that would be interesting to know. So I would say is the answer is always. But think about AI for a moment, even in optimizing an area, of contract negotiation,
Mm-hmm.
understanding in time. Now, again, I know there are tools and AI companies that specialize in contracts, but I haven't seen it specifically for sales. But to ingest all contracts that you've ever done, to
Mm-hmm.
understand organizations that size and that industry, and what are the terms that more likely are going to be impactful and meaningful, and how do you approach that in a thoughtful way, as opposed to it's just the sales rep and maybe the manager and the legal person getting together and trying to go through that in isolation. We have an ability to evolve that, hopefully to both collapse the time frame and come up with terms that are, this is a win-win. I always say is establishing partnerships with customers should be a win-win scenario. Should allow us to develop a set of terms that work for them, because you're hopefully building a really strong and lasting partnership. This isn't transactional. This is a partnership.
Couldn't agree more. Jason, just putting you totally on the spot here, as we're thinking about this vision of AI agents coming in, what kind of impact do you think, do you speculate, this cowboy math, like that this could have on pipelines? Are we basically saying with the same number of leads we could double, triple, quadruple close rates? Are we talking about like lead volume is no longer as important as the ability to be hyper personalized, and the conversion rates could go through the roof? What kind of impact? Or do you think it's a 10-20% and there's a, it's still about the leads where we're getting the marginal improvements? How would you think about the reward on the other side of this lift?
Yeah, what I would say is it's almost hard to quantify. I do believe impact on both pipeline and conversion can be dramatically higher.
Yeah.
Think about conversion for a little bit. Most organizations you're converting at, let's call it 25 or 30% of your pipeline. Well, what if you could be 50% or 60%? And how could it be that way? Well, now you need half the pipeline that you needed before to be
Right.
able to achieve the same measure of success. Half if you jump from 25 to 50. Well, what if you're more effective in being tailored with your messaging and you're also increasing the pipeline side? I'm a big fan of account-based marketing and building pipeline, and ABM can be very effective. But what you tend to find with ABM is it works really well when you're doing it at an extremely small number of accounts.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to pick 10 accounts. We're going to do ABM. Well, first of all, it's very manually intensive and you can do a great job. Well, what happens when you got to go to 500 accounts?
Sure.
The quality of the message now becomes watered down because it isn't true ABM. Well, you now have the ability to scale ABM in a tailored way that you never could before. So, I think sky's the limit in terms of both pipeline massive improvements and, frankly, even quality of pipeline. If we're tracking those signals, if we're tracking engagement, there's a tendency, all sales, if you don't have a lot of pipeline, you're going to hold on to what you've got. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
just very human nature. Well, if all of a sudden you had the ability to be able to be working with three customers and two of them are engaging and there's a pathway to greater success, you have a way as opposed to chasing something that they're just not quite in the market yet. It's just a little bit early. There's other stakeholders that have to get bought in. It can allow everybody to be much more effective, way more effective. So exact percentages, I don't know, but I see massive improvements in both pipeline and conversion.
Massive improvement. Sky is the limit. Where I'd like us to go next is the human aspect of it. You said this before. This is not a replacement, right? What was the word you used? Augmenting, supporting.
I think complementing. I think it's going to complement. When you think about organizations want to drive revenue, and if you have pipeline that's increasing and you have conversion rates that are increasing, what are you going to do? Have less salespeople or more salespeople? If the productivity per salesperson is 2x what it is today, are you going to have more or are you going to have less? You're going to have more.
Let's go.
You might go
Scale.
global. You might go to a global a little bit faster. You might move into new markets, verticals a little bit faster. You may go deeper in different areas. So rather than growing at, hey, we're going to increase our headcount 10%, you're going to increase it more if the productivity is there. And then even talking about the time to productivity in the ramping process. So if you're hiring people and they're able to be productive quicker, are you going to hire more or are you going to hire less? You're going to hire more.
No doubt. That's a great way to look at it. Well, I'm looking at the time, Jason. I could do this all day with you. This is great advice. This has been great information. But I want to talk about one piece of advice that you can give to revenue leaders that are concerned. I think that a lot of folks are very concerned about what's coming and how can they quickly future-proof, right, their go-to-market strategies, orgs with AI without losing the human advantage, without losing the humanity. So what advice would you give them, Jason?
I would say is take time every week to learn. What I try to do, this is true of AI, but it's true of everything. We have to always be reinventing ourselves. If we as sales professionals and leaders are doing the same thing we did 10 years ago, we're not going to be successful. We're doing the same thing we were doing 5 years ago. Well, how do you learn about anything new? Invest the time. What are the podcasts? What are the networking events? What are your peers doing? Continually reach out and find. I have conversations with CROs and CEOs on a regular basis. Anytime any of our VCs have an event and there's anything related to go to market, I go to all of those lunches, dinners, events because you have the opportunity to pick the brains for other people of what's working and what's not working. And I've never attended an event and didn't have 3 or 4 new ideas or takeaways. So what I would say is lean into it, find ways, listen to your peers. Second piece of it is test things out. One of the beauties of AI is it's not this big 2-year implementation. Go test something, see if it's going to be effective, see if it's going to help the business. I think the revenue ops function is going to completely transform, and they should be investing time always. What are the 2 or 3 tools that they're looking to test to help drive more pipeline or help improve conversions?
Great advice. And you mentioned listening to podcasts. This would be the one podcast to continue to listen to. I'm just messing. Jason, really appreciate you joining. And for those who are listening in, do subscribe. And if you have any questions for Jason, just leave them in the comments below or reach out to Jason on his LinkedIn. I'll include a link in the comments or in the description below. Thank you, Jason, for joining.
Great. Thanks, Adam.